North and South Korea have held their first official talks in more than 2 years. The negotiations took place in the de-militarised zone between the two countries. RT's Murad Gazdiev has been following developments.
It went well, which is rare to hear these days when it comes to the Koreas. One, North Korea agreed to send a delegation to the Winter Olympics in Pyongyang. Sports people, performers for the cultural events. It's simple. If the North attends the Olympics, it's much less likely to stage a provocation, launch another missile. Two, family reunions. Relatives separated by the war that haven't seen each other for decades could be allowed reunions next month. And three, perhaps most importantly, South Korea has proposed face-to-face meetings between the North's and the South's military officials in order to de-escalate tensions at long last, ultimately to denuclearize the peninsula. It's a long shot, but it's a start.
I think we should be engaged in these talks in an earnest, sincere manner to give a New Year's gift, namely the results of the talks, to the Korean nation.
As you mentioned earlier, we hope to bring a precious gift to your people that matches the expectations of our people.
It has been a chaotic year. From escalation to escalation, saber-rattling and childish rhetoric. Near enough every month, the US and South Korea would stage war games on the North's borders that send a message. They even sent nuclear bombers to the North's borders. North Korea was no less provocative. It tested increasingly advanced ballistic missiles, staged suspected nuclear weapons tests, and it now reportedly has the capacity to hit mainland United States. And Kim Jong-un has boasted he has his own button on his desk as part of whose button is bigger contest with Trump. Which is why these talks were so important. They allow for a pause, for hot heads to cool off, and for tightened fingers to ease off on the triggers.
I think it's a step back from a military solution because there is no military solution other than death and destruction of hundreds of thousands or 1 million people or more. In the long run, both sides would benefit from peace, whether there are people within each government that have an objective to maintain this conflict, to maintain the battle state. There probably are. However, so it's hard to say put North Korea into one camp. However, I see what can come from the talks is a type of peace treaty and a type of situation where these countries can learn to live in peace, and that's only going to come from building relationships.
The latest talks follow months of saber-rattling between North Korea and the US. However, Donald Trump claims it was his aggressive attitude towards Pyongyang that made the diplomatic breakthrough possible.
Totally destroy North Korea.
That's called the military option.
The nuclear and ballistic missile programs of that regime require a determined response. Little Rocket Man, he is a sick puppy.
A lot of people have said, a lot of people have written that without my rhetoric and without my tough stance, and it's not just a stance, I mean, this is what has to be done, if it has to be done, that they wouldn't be talking about Olympics, that they wouldn't be talking right now.
Well, to discuss this further, we're now joined by Jim Jatras, former US diplomat. Jim, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, as we've just heard, there are some key breakthroughs on upcoming military talks, Olympic attendance and family reunions. But how significant is this for North and South Korea?
Kate, I think it's hugely significant, and maybe we will have a happy new year. I think this is very, very welcome news that there is a constructive dialogue going on between the two Koreas, and I hope something comes of it. I mean, when all's said and done, the political arrangements on the peninsula between the two countries are paramount here, and if they're talking, I think that leaves a lot less room for other countries, notably the United States, to complain about things.
Well, as you mentioned there, the US, I mean, their government welcomed the negotiations, but do you think Washington is happy about being sidelined in these talks?
You know, that's a real question here. Again, President Trump is taking credit for this because of his hard rhetoric. Now, was there some element of choreography here that the more belligerent we sounded, the more it encouraged some kind of a side dialogue between the two Koreas? I suspect that at least in the president's mind, this is a welcome development. Whether it is around some of the people who are advising him, that's another story.
Well, let's look at the North Korean delegation. They made it clear they will not denuclearize. They're saying our weapons are only aimed at the United States, I should say, not our brethren, nor China and Russia. Well, do you think then that Seoul will feel reassured by that?
I think maybe somewhat reassured, but not very much. Remember, there are almost 30,000 Americans in South Korea, American forces, and no doubt they will still be targeted. There are many more Americans in Japan, and you notice he didn't say he wouldn't target the Japanese, of whom the Koreans are not particularly fond. I do think it would be a huge mistake, though, for the United States to say that we will only talk if the object of the negotiation is denuclearization. If the U.S. wants to go into that position, fine, but you cannot expect the other side to agree before talks take place on what the outcome should be. Right now, the object should be to extend what is now a kind of a mirror moratorium between our exercises with the South Koreans and the North Korean tests. That's pretty much what the Russians and Chinese have been proposing. They're not calling it double freeze, but maybe we can get to a double freeze.
And finally, Jim, South Korea will temporarily lift sanctions to allow the North to attend the Pyongyang Games. That was actually the preamble for these talks. I mean, could this provide a lifeline for the North's isolated economy, though?
I think it's a little too soon to talk about their economy, but if we have a reopening of the so-called sunshine policy, which then can branch into economic development, that's great. The fact that the North is sending a team to Pyeongchang is great. In fact, in previous Olympics, the North and the South, even though they competed separately, even marched into the opening ceremonies under the same flag, the same unification flag. And I hope they do that on this occasion as well.
Yeah, I think there has been talk of that indeed. Thank you, Jim Jatras, former US diplomat. Thank you.